Doctor had spent 14 years of her life studying alien stomachs and what aliens could eat safely. She worked aboard a space station called Horizon's Edge that floated somewhere between Earth and the outer colonies. Her job was simple but important. She had to make sure that when humans met aliens, nobody got sick from eating the wrong food. She had written books about it. She had given lectures about it. She thought she had seen everything there was to see about alien digestion. She was wrong. They arrived on a Tuesday morning according to Earth Standard Time. Their ship was beautiful in the way that ice sculptures are beautiful. It caught the light from distant stars and seemed to glow from within, watched from the observation deck as it docked with the station. She had read all the files about but reading about something and seeing it are two different things entirely. They were tall beings with bodies that looked almost like glass. You could see through their skin if you looked closely enough. The most remarkable thing about them was that their skin changed based on how they were feeling. Blue meant they were calm, green meant they were curious, red meant they were angry or excited. Had memorized all the meanings before their arrival because she believed that understanding was the first step toward friendship. The delegation consisted of 17 individuals led by an ambassador whose full name was so long and musical that humans could not pronounce it properly. The translation software said the name meant something like graceful wind through crystal valleys. Decided to call him Ambassador Grace in her head because that was easier to remember. Station Commander Bradley met the delegation at the airlock. Was a friendly man from a small town in Ohio who had somehow ended up running a diplomatic station at the edge of known space. He had a round face and a bigger smile, and he genuinely liked meeting new species. Had worked with him for 3 years, and she had never seen him be anything but welcoming to visitors. The delegation stepped onto the station with careful movements. Their bodies were not used to the artificial gravity that humans preferred. Ambassador Grace moved forward and performed a gesture that the files said was a greeting of respect. Returned it as best he could with his very human arms. "Welcome to Horizon's Edge," said through the translator device on his collar. "We are to have you here." Ambassador Grace's skin rippled with soft green and blue. "We are to be welcomed. Your species has a reputation for warmth that we are pleased to find is true." Stepped forward with her scanner ready. "Ambassador, I am Doctor. I am the station's biologist. My job is to make sure that your stay here is comfortable and safe. May I ask some questions about your dietary needs?" The ambassador's skin turned a pleasant shade of orange, which knew meant openness and cooperation. "Of course, Doctor. We have studied your food databases and believe that many of your foods will be compatible with our biology. However, your caution is wise and welcome." They walked together through the station corridors, asked questions about digestion, or pointed out various features of the station like a proud homeowner showing off his house. The younger members of the delegation looked around with obvious curiosity. Their skin flickered with greens and yellows as they examined the strange human technology surrounding them. One young caught's attention. The translation software said this one's name meant Bright Morning on still waters. Bright Morning was clearly the youngest of the group and seemed especially fascinated by everything. The young alien kept wandering away from the group to look at things more closely before being gently guided back by the older delegates. They reached the conference room where the formal greetings would take place, took baseline readings of all 17 while made small talk with the ambassador. The readings were interesting. They had a very different internal chemistry than humans, but nothing that suggested immediate dietary dangers. Felt cautiously optimistic. The formal meeting lasted 2 hours. There were speeches and exchanges of gifts and all the careful dancing that first contact required. Paid attention, but she was also thinking about lunch. They had requested to experience human cuisine as part of the cultural exchange. It was now her job to make sure that experience did not end in disaster. When the meeting concluded, clapped his hands together with obvious excitement. "Well, that went wonderfully. Now how about we get you folks some real Earth food?" Ambassador Grace's skin shifted to curious green. "We would be most interested in this experience. What do you recommend?" Grinned the grin of a man about to share his thing. "Well, it just so happens to be Tuesday." Felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew what was about to say. "And on Tuesdays," continued happily, "we have a tradition. It's called Taco Tuesday." The ambassador tilted his head in the way that did when they encountered something new. "Taco, this word does not translate. What is a taco?" Looked like someone had just asked him to explain the meaning of life, and he knew the answer. A taco is one of humanity's greatest inventions. It's a shell made from grain that holds meat and vegetables and cheese and sauces. It's simple, but it's perfect. Stepped forward quickly. "Commander, I haven't finished my analysis of dietary compatibility. Perhaps we should start with something simpler." "It's just tacos," waved away her concern like it was a fly. "What's the worst that could happen?" Would remember those words for a very long time. She would remember them in the quiet hours of the night when she could not sleep. She would remember them when she was standing before the Galactic Council trying to explain how everything had gone so wrong. She would remember them every single Taco Tuesday for the rest of her life. But in that moment she just sighed and followed the group toward the cafeteria. She told herself that she was probably being too careful. She told herself that had hosted dozens of alien delegations and nothing bad had ever happened during a meal. She told herself that tacos were just food and food was her specialty, and she would make sure everything was fine. The cafeteria was bright and clean and smelled like cooking meat and spices. Chef Danny had prepared a beautiful spread. There were soft tortillas and crunchy shells. There was seasoned beef and shredded chicken. There were bowls of fresh vegetables and grated cheese. And there, sitting in a row like soldiers waiting for battle, were the sauces. Looked at those sauce bottles and felt that cold feeling in her stomach grow stronger. She recognized Danny's special reserve salsa. The bottle had a hand-drawn skull on the label. Danny only brought that one out for people who claimed they could handle anything. She should have grabbed that bottle and hidden it. She should have insisted on more testing. She should have trusted her instincts instead of her desire to be a good host. But she did none of those things. Instead, she watched as the delegation gathered around the food with obvious excitement. She watched as Ambassador Grace picked up a taco with careful fingers and examined it like a precious. She watched as Bright Morning reached for the bottle with the skull on it. And then she watched as everything changed forever. The first bite that Ambassador Grace took was a success by any measure. The tall alien's skin shifted through that had never seen in any before. Soft pinks and warm oranges swirled together in patterns that the translation software identified as deep pleasure and satisfaction. The ambassador chewed slowly and thoughtfully like someone a fine wine. "This is remarkable," Ambassador Grace said after swallowing. "The texture creates interesting sensations. The outer shell provides structure while the contents offer variety. Your species has found a clever solution to the problem of portable nutrition." Practically glowed with pride, had to admit that even she felt a little pleased. First meals with new species were always delicate affairs, and this one seemed to be going perfectly. The other delegates followed their ambassador's lead and began selecting tacos from the spread. Their skins all shifted to pleasant as they tasted the food. Danny stood behind his counter with his arms crossed and a satisfied smile on his face. He had cooked for dozens of alien species over his career, and he took great pride in his work. Every successful first meal was another victory in his personal record. Moved through the group with her scanner taking readings. Everything looked normal. The bodies seemed to be processing the food without any problems. Their internal chemistry showed minor fluctuations but nothing outside safe parameters. She began to relax just a little bit. That was when Bright Morning reached for the hot sauce. Saw it happen, but she was too far away to stop it. The young had already tried one taco and was clearly enjoying the experience, but Bright Morning had noticed the row of sauce bottles and was curious about them. Young beings are always curious. It is their nature and usually their strength, but sometimes curiosity leads to unexpected places. Bright Morning picked up the bottle with the skull on it. Danny saw this and his smile faded slightly, but he did not move to stop it. He probably assumed that a being smart enough to travel between stars would be smart enough to recognize a warning symbol. He did not realize that skulls meant nothing in culture. The young alien opened the bottle and poured a generous amount of the red sauce onto a fresh taco. Started moving toward them, but she was weaving between other delegates. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words came too late. Bright Morning took a large bite. For 3 seconds nothing happened. Counted those seconds in her head because time seemed to slow down in the way it does during moments of crisis. 1, 2, 3. Bright Morning chewed with that same thoughtful expression that the ambassador had worn. Then the young skin began to change. It started slowly. A ripple moved across Bright Morning's translucent body like a wave moving across still water. Blue became green, became yellow, became orange, became red. But then they kept changing. They shifted into shades that had no names for, that she was not sure human eyes could properly see. A sound emerged from Bright Morning's throat. It was not a scream exactly. It was something between a song and a cry. The note was so pure and so strange that it made bones vibrate. The others stopped eating and turned to look. Their own skins began to flicker with alarm. Bright Morning, Ambassador Grace moved toward the young delegate with obvious concern. "What is wrong? What are you experiencing?" But Bright Morning did not answer with words. The young alien's body began to glow, not just change but actually produce light. A soft radiance poured from within, as if someone had turned on a lamp inside that crystalline body. Finally reached them, she held up her scanner and tried to take readings, but the numbers made no sense. They jumped and changed and displayed values that should have been impossible. "Everyone stay calm," she said, even though her own voice shook slightly. "I need to understand what is happening." Appeared at her side. His face had lost its usual cheerful expression. "What's going on?" "I don't know yet." She grabbed the hot sauce bottle and looked at the ingredients. Peppers, vinegar, salt, capsaicin, nothing that should cause this kind of reaction, nothing that should make an alien glow like a star. Bright Morning's skin cycles began to slow down. The chaotic changes settled into a steady pulse of light. The young stopped making that strange sound and stood very still. Then, slowly, Bright Morning began to rise off the floor. Watched with her mouth hanging open as the young alien floated upward, not jumping, not bouncing, floating. Bright Morning rose 2 inches off the cafeteria floor and stayed there, hovering like gravity had simply decided to take a break. "That's impossible," Danny said from behind his counter. "That's completely impossible." Ambassador Grace approached Bright Morning with careful steps. The ambassador's own skin had shifted to a deep purple that translator could not identify. "Young one, how do you feel?" Bright Morning's voice came out different than before. It seemed to echo slightly as if coming from more than one place at once. "I feel everything, Ambassador. I feel the station around us. I feel the stars beyond the walls. I feel the space between atoms." Scanner finally gave her a reading that made some kind of sense. She stared at it and then stared at it again because she did not want to believe what she was seeing. "The capsaicin," she whispered. "It's doing something to their cells, something impossible." "What kind of something?" asked. "Their cells are using the capsaicin as some kind of catalyst. It's triggering a quantum coherence effect. Their biology is doing something that physics says should not be possible." Looked up at Bright Morning still floating peacefully above the floor. "They're evolving, right here in front of us. They're becoming something new." Ambassador Grace turned to look at. The purple of the ambassador's skin had deepened even further. "Doctor, what is in that red sauce?" "Capsaicin, it's a compound found in peppers. It creates a sensation of heat in human mouths. We use it to make our food spicy." Felt like she was explaining fire to someone who had never seen a flame. "I was worried it might be harmful to your biology. I never imagined it might do this." The ambassador looked at the bottle in his hand. Then the ambassador looked at Bright Morning. Then the ambassador looked at again with an expression that she could not read at all. "Harmful," Ambassador Grace said slowly. "Doctor, in our language we have a word for what Bright Morning is experiencing. It does not translate well into your tongue. The closest meaning would be transcendence." "Transcendence," repeated the word as if tasting it. "For generations our scientists have theorized that our species had dormant biological potential, pathways built into our cells that never activated because we never found the right catalyst." The ambassador's voice was quiet and filled with something that might have been wonder. "We searched our entire world. We searched the worlds we colonized. We never found it." Looked at the bottle of hot sauce in her hand, the bottle with the skull on the label, the bottle that Danny made in his spare time using peppers from the station's small garden. "You're telling me," she said carefully, "that hot sauce is the key to evolution." Ambassador Grace's skin shifted to a bright gold that the translator identified as profound joy. "I am telling you, Doctor, that Taco Tuesday may have just changed the future of my entire species." From above them, Bright Morning laughed. It was a beautiful sound that made the lights in the cafeteria flicker. The young spun slowly in the air like a leaf caught in a gentle wind. "This is either very good news or very bad news," said quietly. Without looking away from the floating alien, "I have a feeling it might be both." 3 hours after the incident in the cafeteria, sat in her laboratory surrounded by more data than she had collected in her entire career. Every machine she owned was running. Every sensor was active. Every screen displayed information that should have been impossible but was happening anyway right in front of her eyes. Bright Morning floated near the ceiling like a glowing balloon. The young had not touched the ground since that first bite of hot sauce. At first had worried that this might be distressing, but Bright Morning seemed perfectly content. More than content, actually. The young alien seemed happy in a way that radiated outward like warmth from a fire. Her assistant Peter sat at a workstation nearby. Peter was a young man from New Mexico who had 2 things that made him valuable on a space station. He had a master's degree in biology, and he could make green chili stew that would make you cry with happiness. Right now he was not making stew. He was at his screen with an expression that suggested his brain was trying to process too much information at once. "Doctor," he said without looking up, "I think I understand part of what's happening. Please explain it to me, Peter, because nothing I'm seeing makes any sense." Peter pulled up a holographic display that floated between them. It showed the molecular structure of capsaicin alongside something from the They evolved on a planet with very specific atmospheric conditions. Their bodies process certain minerals in ways that human bodies cannot. They have biological pathways that we don't have because we never needed them. I know all this, Peter. Get to the part that matters. Capsaicin, the compound that makes peppers hot, has a molecular structure that is almost identical to a substance found in rare crystals on the… Peter pointed at the two structures side by side. See, they're nearly the same. The difference is so small that biology treats them as the same thing. Leaned closer to look at the display. She could see what Peter meant. The two molecules were like twins, not identical but so close that they might as well be. But these crystals on there, they don't cause this reaction. They do, but in tiny amounts. The crystals are incredibly rare and they only encounter trace amounts in their entire lives. Their bodies can process those trace amounts without triggering anything unusual. Peter pulled up another display showing the amount of capsaicin in Danny's hot sauce. But this is like giving them 1,000 years worth of that compound in a single bite. Thought about what Ambassador Grace had said. Dormant biological potential. Pathways that never activated because they never found the right catalyst. So we didn't poison them. We overdosed them on something they already had access to. Exactly, and the overdose triggered something that their evolution had been waiting for, something their cells already knew how to do but never had the chance to do. Peter gestured at bright morning floating above them. They're not getting sick, they're getting upgraded. Walked over to where bright morning drifted peacefully. The young alien's skin still glowed with that soft inner light, but the changes had stabilized. Now bright morning pulsed with gentle blues and golds that the translator identified as contentment and wonder. Bright morning, can you tell me what you're experiencing? The young looked down at her with eyes that seemed deeper than before. I can feel things I could not feel before, Doctor. I can sense the gravity that holds this station together. I can feel the electromagnetic fields from your machines. When I concentrate, I can sense the quantum vibrations of atoms themselves. And you can float. Bright morning smiled. It was strange to see a smile because their faces were not designed for it the way human faces were, but somehow the expression translated perfectly. Floating is the simplest part. I think I can do much more. I think all of us can do much more. As if responding to those words, the door to the laboratory opened. Ambassador Grace entered with 3 other delegates. All of them had consumed the hot sauce during the meal. All of them were glowing now, not as brightly as bright morning, but glowing nonetheless. Doctor, the ambassador said, we need to discuss what happens next. And gestured for them to come in. She noticed that one of the delegates was not walking. The delegate was sliding across the floor as if the floor were ice and the delegate was skating. Another delegate seemed to leave a trail of sparks in the air wherever they moved. The third delegate flickered slightly like a candle flame in a breeze. Ambassador, I need to understand more about what's happening before we do anything else. The changes happening in your bodies are unprecedented. I have no idea if they're permanent or temporary. I have no idea if they're safe in the long term. Ambassador Grace's skin shifted to that deep purple again. Doctor, I appreciate your scientific caution, but you must understand what this means to us. For 1,000 years, our philosophers have debated whether they had reached the limit of our potential. Many believed that we were complete as a species, that evolution had done all it would do for us. And now we know that we were wrong. There was more waiting for us. We simply never found the key. The ambassador looked at the other delegates and then at bright morning floating near the ceiling. Your species has given us a gift beyond measure, a gift you did not even know you possessed. Peter spoke up from his workstation. Ambassador, we need to be careful here. The other species in the galactic community might not see this the same way you do. Felt a chill at those words because Peter was right. The galactic community was a fragile thing built on treaties and agreements and very careful balances of power. One species suddenly developing new abilities could upset that balance in unpredictable ways. The Galactic Council will need to be informed, she said. They're going to want to understand what happened here. Ambassador Grace slowly. Yes, they will, and many of them will be afraid. Fear is a natural response to the unknown. The ambassador paused and that purple deepened further. But I do not believe that fear should stop us from embracing this opportunity. They have been given a chance to become something greater than we were. We intend to take that chance. Above them, bright morning had begun to sing softly. It was not a song with words but a pure tone that seemed to resonate with something deep inside's chest. The other glowing joined in one by one. The laboratory filled with music that was not quite sound but something more, something that made the air itself feel alive. Watched and listened and felt the weight of what was happening settle onto her shoulders. She was a biologist. Her job was to understand alien bodies and keep them safe. She had never expected to be present at the moment when an entire species took a step forward in their evolution. She had never expected to be the one responsible for making sure that step did not lead to disaster. "Peter," she said quietly, "start writing up everything we know. We're going to need to present this to the council." "What are you going to tell them?" Looked at the glowing aliens filling her laboratory with music that made her heart feel too big for her chest. She looked at bright morning floating peacefully among the ceiling lights. She looked at Ambassador Grace watching her with those deep ancient eyes. "I'm going to tell them the truth," she said. "I'm going to tell them that Taco Tuesday changed everything." The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called within 6 standard hours of the incident. Found herself standing in a holographic chamber facing representatives from 47 different species. Some were tall and thin like some were short and rocky like some were so strange that mind could not quite process what she was seeing. Ambassador Gray stood beside her, still glowing with that soft inner light. The ambassador had insisted on attending the session even though had suggested resting might be wise. The ambassador said that rest could wait, history could not. The representative spoke first. There were beings made of living stone who had existed for millions of years before humans discovered fire. They were respected throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and their patience. Right now the representative did not look patient at all. "Let me understand this correctly," the said with a voice like grinding rocks. "You fed the delegation a common human food item, and now they can manipulate fundamental forces of the universe." Cleared her throat and tried to sound more confident than she felt. "That is an accurate summary, yes, though I should clarify that they can only manipulate some fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetic radiation, and something that might be related to quantum mechanics. We are still conducting research. And this food item is freely available to any human." Thought about the taco trucks on every corner of every city on Earth. She thought about the hot sauce bottles in every grocery store. She thought about the pepper plants growing in gardens across the planet. "Yes, tacos are one of our most common foods." The chamber erupted into chaos. 47 species all began talking at once. Some were angry, some were frightened, some seemed excited in ways that made nervous. The translation software in her ear struggled to keep up with all the overlapping voices. The representative demanded to know if this constituted a biological weapon. There were an ancient species who trusted no one and had survived for millennia by being suspicious of everything. Their concern was not surprising. The representative called for Earth to be immediately quarantined until the situation could be properly studied. They were known throughout the galaxy for their extreme caution. They had once spent 300 years debating whether to open trade with another species. The representative wanted samples of every human food so they could test for similar effects on their own biology. They were always looking for advantages, and this seemed like an opportunity they did not want to miss. Leaned over too, he had insisted on attending the session as well since he was the station commander and felt responsible for what had happened. "This is going well," he whispered. "This is a disaster," whispered back. "Same thing, really." Ambassador Grace raised a hand, and suddenly the entire chamber went silent, not because of any rule or protocol, but because the ambassador had temporarily removed the ability of sound to travel through the room. It was an impressive demonstration of the new abilities they had gained. "Delegates," Ambassador Grace said, somehow speaking despite the silence, "I believe you are missing the important point of this situation." The representative made a gesture that might have been a question. No one else moved or tried to speak. They could not. "Humanity did not intentionally give us these abilities," the ambassador continued. "They did not plan this. They did not scheme or plot or manipulate. They simply invited us to share a meal with them. They offered us the food that brings them joy. They welcomed us to their table as friends." The silence in the chamber seemed to deepen somehow. "In all my years of diplomatic service, I have traveled to many worlds and met many species. I have attended formal dinners and ritual feasts and ceremonial gatherings, but I have never before experienced what humans call Taco Tuesday." Ambassador Grace's skin shifted to warm that the translator identified as affection and gratitude. It was informal, it was casual, it was offered with genuine warmth and absolutely no expectation of anything in return. The ambassador let sound return to the chamber gradually, could hear the representatives beginning to stir and murmur among themselves. "The question before this council is not what humans have done to us," Ambassador Grace said. "The question is what we will do with this gift they did not know they were giving." The representative leaned forward. "And what do you intend to do with it?" Ambassador Grace took a moment before, watched the shift across that translucent skin. She was beginning to understand the new shades. The ambassador was thinking deeply about something important. "We intend to share it," the ambassador finally said. A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. The representative made a sound of disbelief. The representative perked up with obvious interest. Sherrod asked, "What do you mean?" "Doctor, you have given us something precious, something that changes what it means to be. We could keep this knowledge to ourselves. We could guard it and protect it and use it to gain power over others." The ambassador shook his head slowly. "But that is not who we want to be. That is not who your kindness showed us we could be." The representative finally spoke. "You would allow other species to study this phenomenon, to potentially replicate it for themselves." "We would do more than allow it," Ambassador Grace said. "We would encourage it. Doctor has already begun to understand how capsaicin interacts with our biology. With more research, we can determine whether other human foods might have similar effects on other species." His mind raced at the implications. Every species in the galaxy had different biology, different chemistry, different evolutionary pathways. If human food could unlock dormant potential in the then, perhaps it could do the same for others. Perhaps there were other gifts hidden in human kitchens waiting to be discovered. "This is unprecedented," the representative said slowly. "In all our history, we have never heard of such a thing." "Perhaps that is because no one has ever tried," Ambassador Grace replied. "Perhaps it is because species have always guarded their advantages instead of them. Perhaps it is time for a different approach." Stepped forward, had almost forgotten he was there. "Representatives, I'd like to add something if I may." The chamber grew quiet again, but this time it was normal silence born of attention rather than the unnatural silence of removed sound. "I'm just a station commander. I'm not a scientist or a diplomat or a philosopher, but I know something about food." His voice was steady and warm. "Where I come from, we have a saying, the more you share your table, the bigger your family grows. We didn't know that our tacos would do this to the, but I'm not sorry it happened, because it happened while we were all eating together, as friends, as family." Watch the representatives process these words. She saw shift on alien skins and features rearrange themselves into expressions she was only beginning to understand. She saw fear and suspicion, but she also saw something else. She saw curiosity, she saw hope. "I propose," Ambassador Grace said, "that we establish a formal research initiative, humans and working together to understand what happened here. And then, when we understand it better, we open that research to any species that wishes to participate." "And what do you want in return?" the representative asked. They always asked that question. They did not believe in gifts. Ambassador Grace smiled, that strange smile that should not have worked on a face but somehow did. "We want lunch, every Tuesday if possible, with hot sauce." For the first time since the session began, heard laughter in the chamber. It came from many different throats and sounded in many different ways, but it was all recognizably the same emotion. It was the sound of tension breaking. It was the sound of possibility opening up. Allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this disaster might turn into something better. 6 months had passed since the day that hot sauce changed everything. Stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Culinary Exchange Center watching ships from 30 different worlds dock at the station's ports. The original station Horizon's Edge was still there at the center of the complex, but it had grown. New modules and docking bays and research facilities had been added to accommodate the flood of visitors who came seeking what the galaxy now called the human food effect. The name made smile every time she heard it. Scientists across dozens of worlds had tried to come up with something more technical. They had proposed names with long words and Latin roots and numbers that meant nothing to ordinary people. But somehow human food effect had stuck. It was simple and accurate, and everyone understood what it meant. Peter appeared beside her carrying 2 cups of coffee. He had been promoted 3 times since the incident. Now he ran the entire research division with a team of 60 scientists from 12 different species. He still made green chili stew on Sundays, and it was still the best thing had ever tasted. "Ambassador Grace wants to know if you've finished the safety protocols for next week's event," Peter said as he handed her a cup. Took a sip and felt the warmth spread through her. "Tell the ambassador that everything is ready. The habanero peppers have been tested. The volunteers have signed all the paperwork. Danny promises he won't sneak ghost peppers into anything without written permission this time." Peter laughed. "That's still my story." The look on that delegate's face when they started shooting sparks from their fingertips. It wasn't funny at the time, but was smiling too. In the months since the first incident, they had learned so much about how human foods interacted with alien biology. They had also learned that Danny could not be trusted around peppers and unsuspecting aliens. A ship drifted past the viewport. Its hull glowed with the soft light that was now common among their species. Nearly every had chosen to undergo the capsaicin treatment. The effects varied from individual to individual, but all of them came away changed. Some could manipulate gravity, some could sense electromagnetic fields, some could communicate through pure thought. All of them glowed with that beautiful inner light. "We have visitors arriving from the tomorrow," Peter said. "They want to try the fermented cabbage again." They had been skeptical at first. Their rocky bodies seemed so different from organic life that no one expected human food to affect them at all. But Peter had a theory about the trace minerals in fermented vegetables, and he had been right. The sauerkraut that's grandmother used to make had triggered something in biology that even they themselves had not known existed. The first to eat sauerkraut had an arm that had been lost in an accident 3 centuries earlier. Word spread quickly after that. Now they were among the station's most frequent visitors. They had become passionate advocates for the research initiative and had contributed significant resources to expanding the facilities. "What about asked, any progress there?" Peter shook his head, still suspicious, still refusing to let any of their people participate in the trials. "But I heard that they've been quietly testing ranch dressing on their own." "Ranch dressing?" "Apparently the ambassador mentioned something about it having interesting effects, and they have been obsessed ever since." Peter grinned. "They won't admit it, but I think they're afraid of missing out." Looked out at the ships coming and going. She thought about all the species that had come seeking what humanity had accidentally discovered they could offer. They had found that chocolate produced enhanced pattern recognition. They were still the most cautious species in the galaxy, but now they were cautious with the ability to see patterns no one else could see. Their contributions to mathematics and cryptography had advanced significantly. They had experimented with dozens of human foods before finding one that affected them. In the end, it turned out to be honey. Something about the complex sugars interacted with their metabolism in a way that allowed them to enter a state of deep meditation. The who had tried it described feeling connected to something larger than themselves. They had become less aggressive and more interested in cooperation since then. Even species that were not directly affected by any human food had benefited from the initiative. The research into cross-species biochemistry had led to medical advances that helped everyone. New treatments for old diseases, new understanding of how different biologies worked, new connections between peoples who had never had reason to talk before. Bradley appeared on the observation deck. He was no longer just a station commander. Now he held the official title of Director of Culinary Relations. It was a title that made him laugh every time he said it, but it came with real responsibilities. He had become one of the most important diplomats in the galaxy, all because he had suggested tacos for lunch. "We've got a situation," said. "The delegation wants to know if we can arrange for them to try pizza." "Pizza? We haven't tested pizza on biology yet." They saw some humans eating it in the cafeteria, and now they're convinced it will give them special powers. Shrugged. "I told them we need to run tests first, but they're being very insistent." Sighed, but she was not really annoyed. This was her life now. Every day brought new questions and new possibilities and new chances to discover something unexpected. It was exhausting and wonderful, and she would not trade it for anything. "Tell them we'll start testing next week," she said. "Peter, can you put together a protocol for pizza compatibility trials?" "Already on it." Peter was typing on his tablet. "I'm thinking we start with plain cheese and work our way up to pepperoni." Ambassador Grace entered the observation deck. The ambassador still glowed with that inner light, but now the glow was stronger. In 6 months, the ambassador had become something remarkable, not just able to manipulate gravity or project thoughts, but able to somehow sense the connections between all living things. Ambassador Grace had told once that the feeling was like hearing music that had always been playing, but had been too quiet to notice before. "Doctor," the ambassador said, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you have done." "I didn't really do anything, Ambassador. It was an accident, a happy accident, but still an accident." Perhaps the ambassador's skin shifted to that now recognized as deep wisdom and gentle amusement. Or perhaps some accidents are the universe's way of introducing species to each other. Perhaps your tacos were always meant to find us. Perhaps we were always meant to find each other. Did not know if she believed in fate or destiny or the universe having plans. She was a scientist. She believed in data and evidence and careful observation. But standing here on the observation deck watching ships from across the galaxy come seeking the gifts that human food could offer, she could almost believe that something larger was at work. "Whatever it was," she said, "I'm glad it happened." As AMI Ambassador Grace looked out at the stars, "My people have been changed forever because a human commander wanted to share his lunch. When the historians of the future write about this moment, they will struggle to explain how something so simple led to something so profound." Laughed at that. "They'll probably leave out the part where Danny spilled hot sauce on his shirt. and said a word that doesn't translate into any alien language. I think they should include that part, Ambassador Grace said. It is important to remember that great moments in history are made by ordinary beings doing ordinary things. A meal, making a mess, saying words in frustration. These are the moments that matter. Thought about all the meals yet to come, all the foods yet to be tested, all the species yet to discover what human cooking might unlock in their biology. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities she could not yet imagine. Somewhere in the station's cafeteria, Danny was for the evening meal. The menu included dishes from 17 different cultures. There was a new hot sauce he wanted to try, and a delegation from a species had never heard of scheduled to arrive in an hour. Above the hot sauce selection, a sign had been posted. It was written in 14 different languages and it said, "Caution, contents may cause evolution. Consume responsibly, not responsible for accidental enlightenment or diplomatic incidents. All food served with humanity's compliments." Had added a smaller sign below it that read, "Taco Tuesday, now a galactic tradition." Smiled at the memory of that sign. Then she finished her coffee, straightened her coat, and went back to work. There were aliens to feed and universes to change, and it was almost Tuesday. The galaxy was waiting for lunch.